Hello everyone, welcome to part 3 of the renal physiology. Physiology part 3 actually. We are still with the renal system. I think that we'll be able to complete it by the next part. I do not know yet. We completed till calcium. No, we did not do this. I think we did it till here, urea. I hope that everyone's clear with this. Today we'll be doing calcium reabsorption. So let's begin with calcium reabsorption. Today we'll try to complete a lot more things apart from this. So calcium reabsorption option. This is it. How does calcium reabsorption occur? First of all, what we need to know is that calcium is freely filtered. It is freely filtered in nephron, right? So in the nephron, it gets freely filtered. There is no, resistance to its filtration. So what happens is, okay, this is sorted. We have two hormones, parathormone, and we have activated vitamin D, right? D3, 125, if you know OH. So what happens is, when calcium reaches in the PCT, it gets reabsorbed. Then when it reaches in the loop of Henle, it again gets reabsorbed. But then there's again a small quantity of calcium that stays behind, right? It needs to be reabsorbed, and that is in the collecting duct and the DCT. So there the role of parathormone and D3 comes. So what happens is, in the DCT, what happens? There are calcium channels. There are calcium channels which will absorb calcium. So where is calcium going to go? This is the urine. If you remember, this is how I've been telling you every single time. And this is blood, and this is your cell in between. This is the apical part, this is the basolateral part. So here there are calcium channels. These calcium channels are going to take inside calcium. Now what happens is that in this luminal cells there is a lot of calcium. Now where will this calcium go? Now it has no place to go, right? So there are two channels which I'm going to tell you right now. One is calcium ATPase. Take this one. This is calcium ATPase. And the other one is sodium calcium antiport. These are two channels which will help in reabsorption of calcium from this cell, which is getting stored into the body. Into the blood it goes, and then it gets inside the body. Do you understand? So what is important about it is that parathormone and D3, both of them has its effect over this channel, calcium ATPase. But none of them have their control over the sodium calcium antiport. Do you understand? So this one is working independently. It does not need D3 or parathormone to work. But calcium ATPase is under the influence of parathormone and D3. Okay, it is activated by these two. So this was all about the calcium reabsorption. Next we are going to do water. We have done calcium. We have done diuretics. Type of diuretics. There are 4 types of diuretics. I'll be telling you. Just a second. There are 4 types of diuretics that I'm going to tell you today. Diuretics. So the first type of diuretics are the osmotic diuretics. Osmotic diuretics. What do osmotic diuretics mean? Osmotic diuretic means substances which are osmotically active. What does osmotically active mean? Osmotically active means that any substance which is, when present, it causes movement of water, right? It has the ability to attract water. It has the ability to cause difference in the water movement. So this is known as osmotic diuretics, right? So these osmotic diuretics, these are not reabsorbed in the nephron. In nephron. Okay, if they are not reabsorbed, what will happen? Just imagine I'm making PCT, loop of Henle, DCT, collecting duct. Okay, this is it. Now If it is not reabsorbed, do you agree that it is going to come inside in the urine? This is your urine, right? Whatever is there inside this tubule is the urine. Just imagine it in this way, it becomes easy for you to understand, right? This is your urine. This is the future urine. Okay, it is very useful right now, but as soon as you remove all the useful things, whatever remains becomes the urine, right? So just imagine that in this there is that osmotic diuretic. So what did I tell you right now? That it is freely filtered, it is not reabsorbed. So what is going to happen? It is going to stay in the urine part, it is going to stay in the tubular fluid. What happens? It causes movement of water. So will it allow water to move outside? No. Why? Because it is osmotically active, so it is causing increase in the osmolality of tubular fluid, which is the future urine, right? And whenever there is increased osmolarity of this fluid, water can never move outside. That will be against the gradient, and water never moves against the gradient passively. It will always move against the gradient actively. It will need ATP. Our body does not have provision of giving so much of ATP. What happens later on? There is no movement of water. So originally whatever water used to get reabsorbed in our body, that amount is also not getting reabsorbed. So this osmotically active substance is taking away all the water with it to the collecting duct, to the ureter, to the bladder, and outside the body. Do you understand? So these are osmotic diuretics. Osmotic diuretics are those substances which are not reabsorbed in nephron, which are osmotically active, which have the tendency to attract water with itself, and these causes osmosis, right? So there are few things like glucose is a osmotic diuretic, urea, mannitol, these are example of osmotic diuretics, right? What is osmotic diuresis? Osmotic diuresis is a term. Osmotic diuresis means whenever there is increased quantity of osmotic diuretic in the tubular fluid, means the urine basically, what happens is it will take away all the water. So there is going to be water loss. So there is going to be increased urine output. Do you agree with this point? So the urine output increases. I was saying is that osmotic diuresis or osmotic diuretics are those which are osmotically active. So what they will do is they will keep the fluid inside the tubule. It is going to keep the fluid inside this tubule. It won't allow it to get reabsorbed in the body. It will allow it to stay in the urine itself. So urine will increase. So there is going to be increased urine output. There is going to be polyuria. That is why in uncontrolled diabetes we find polyuria, right? This is the reason. Then let's talk about loop diuretics. Did you understand osmotic diuretics? Now the second one is the loop diuretics. What are loop diuretics? Loop of Henle. These are the most potent type of diuretics. Okay, this is what we need to know. Where do they act? The mechanism of action is sodium potassium 2 chloride actually. Just sodium potassium 2 chloride. This is the channel Symporter. This is the channel which is in the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. So what this channel is originally doing, this is actually reabsorbing sodium, potassium and 2 chloride ions from the urine that is passing, right? So if you inhibit this, the loop diuretics basically inhibit this, there is collectively no reabsorption of 3 ions. What are those? Sodium, potassium and 2 chloride, right? So it is very potent because in a single go it is actually inhibiting the reabsorption of 3 ions, right? So what happens is in this way the tubular fluid osmolarity increases. I'll tell you this again today itself, right? You will be able to understand it better. Increased osmolarity of tubular fluid, and that is how there is increased loss of water from the body. That is what we want when we give diuretics. Okay, it also reduces the renal concentration ability because if these three ions do not get reabsorbed, these three ions will not enter the interstitium. And when they do not enter the interstitial osmolality decreases, right? So medullary interstitium has a very high osmolality, around 1200 milliosmoles. But then if you do not absorb this, so the renal concentration ability also reduces, right? Now, what could be the side effect? The side effect could be it is leading to loss of sodium and potassium. So the major side effect is hypokalemia, hyponatremia. So these are the major side effects, the major electrolyte abnormalities that can be caused by loop diuretics. So it has to be used very judiciously. Otherwise, these are most potent and they act really amazingly. So first was osmotic diuretic, second is loop diuretic. Now coming to the third one, these are the thiazide diuretic. Diuretics. Where do they act on? Do you know the PCT? See, let's just draw it here. This is the PCT, and this is the loop of Henle. This is the ascending limb, then this is the thick ascending limb, then this is the DCT, and then this is the collecting duct, right? This much is the cortex. This is the medulla. Where is the cortex? Where is the medulla? Just let me show it to you here. This is the kidney. This outer, this is the cortex, and the inner is the medulla. I hope it makes sense because I'll have to tell this to you again. So just imagine it this way. Now what happens is, what I was talking about was loop diuretic, right? Loop diuretic is present here. Mechanism of action is over here. This is loop diuretic. Thick ascending limb of loop of Henle. There is sodium, potassium, 2-chloride. What about thiazide diuretic? Thiazide diuretic has its effect over here. What is this? This is the PCT. In the PCT, there is a channel sodium chloride co-transporter. It inhibits this. Did you understand where what is working, right? So this is less efficacious, obviously, because only two, sodium and chloride, two ions it is actually acting on, and then it is acting on PCT. So it is like lesser efficacious, but okay, it is a diuretic. What will it cause? It is causing sodium ka inhibition of absorption, so it is going to cause hyponatremia. No hypokalemia over here. It may cause hyponatremia. Also, it decreases the blood volume. Okay, we'll understand this later. This was about it, the thiazide diuretics. Let's talk about the next one. The next one is potassium sparing diuretic. Potassium sparing diuretics. Okay, what happens is that, just a second, here I want to tell you just one more thing. What happens is, when there is no reabsorption of sodium as well as chloride, both are osmotically active. So sodium and chloride is going to stay in the tubule. It is going to stay in the urine. What it is going to do, it is going to reabsorb water from outside, H2O from outside. Okay, so there is going to be water loss also. So water is also getting lost, sodium is also getting lost, chloride is also getting lost. What happens is, patient becomes dehydrated. Whenever patient becomes dehydrated, there is activation of aldosterone. And whenever aldosterone will come into picture, it will cause increased loss of potassium. So this can indirectly cause hypokalemia. I have told this in the last class. If I just check it somewhere here, it is going to be there, that aldosterone is going to cause, see, aldosterone is going to cause potassium loss by two channels, the Romke channels and the sodium potassium ATPs. If you've not seen this lecture, please go and see. It is very, very important and very irritating type of a topic, right? So what is going to happen? Aldosterone is going to get released whenever there is reduced fluid. So this aldosterone is going to cause loss of potassium, and this loss of potassium is going to present as hypokalemia. So which are the two diuretics which can present as hypokalemia? Loop diuretics and thiazides. Both of these are going to have hypokalemia. So we always need to pay attention to the potassium. So what we can do, we can give potassium sparing diuretics along with these two, right? So potassium sparing diuretics are actually aldosterone inhibitors, because aldosterone is the main culprit. It is causing hypokalemia. So what if we inhibit aldosterone? Whenever we inhibit aldosterone, it is known as potassium sparing diuretics. Major most famous example are spironolactone, eplerenone. These are the most famous examples. Now amiloride also. Amiloride is actually the drug of choice in diabetes insipidus. So what is it going to do? Aldosterone was causing 3-channel activation at a time. See, I have told here also. See, ENaC, ROMK and sodium potassium ATPase. Same thing I'm going to write here also. ENaC, ROMK and sodium potassium ATPase. So these three are going to be inhibited. So this and this, the lower two are responsible for excretion of potassium. So now excretion of potassium is not going to happen. It is known as potassium sparing diuretics, right? This is all. Now the fourth one is carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Not much about it. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. Not much about it. It is in the PCT. It acts in the PCT. In the PCT, it inhibits the reabsorption of bicarbonate. This is what you need to know. That is all. Just one line. It inhibits the reabsorption of bicarbonate. Carbonic anhydrase inhibitor. That is all. That is all that you need to know. Okay? So it is going to reduce the action of sodium proton exchanger. So sodium increases in urine. Whenever it increases in urine, it will also take away water, and that is how diuresis occurs. But this is all that is later on. What you need to remember is that it is inhibiting the reabsorption of bicarbonate, right? This is all. Now let's get to the next one. Glomerular filtration. New topic. Okay. Glomerular filtration. See, very easy to understand, but just understand. What is coming is the afferent arteriole. What is leaving is the efferent arteriole. Whatever is remaining in the Bowman's capsule is the tuft of capillaries, right? So this is the glomerulus. This is the glomerulus, right? So what happens is blood is coming from here. Just imagine, it is like irritating, but okay, let's see. Blood is coming from here. The 100% of everything. Through the glomerulus, there is filtration of many things. Many things will get filtered, right? So a lot of things will get filtered, and things which do not get filtered, that stayed in the efferent. Just stay with me for a minute. What I'm going to say, please understand that. If there is protein, we know that protein is not going to get filtered. So protein is there in the afferent arteriole also, and protein is there in the efferent arteriole also. But if I ask you, where is the concentration more? Where is protein more concentrated? In the afferent part or in the efferent part? What would be your vote? My vote will be that it is going to be more in the efferent part. Why? Because everything else has gone, right? If protein was 10%, 10% was, let's say, sodium, 10% was chloride, 10% was calcium, 10% was someone else, X, 10% was Y, 10% was Z. There were so many things. Now what happened? Out of these so many things, all of these got filtered. So in the efferent part, what is remaining? Only protein is remaining, right? So it becomes more concentrated over here. I hope you understand what I just said. So it is more concentrated. So whatever that is not getting filtered is found in more concentrated amount in the efferent limb and in less concentrated amount in the afferent limb. Did you understand? Stupid topic, but still. So what is the normal GFR? The GFR is 120 ml per minute. Okay. So what is the filtration rate? 120 ml per minute. Glomerular filtration rate. But how much does the kidney get? The renal plasma flow. The renal plasma flow is 600 ml per minute. So obviously, whatever blood kidney is getting, that is 600. But whatever it is filtering is only 120, which means that the amount that is being filtered is lesser than the amount that is being supplied. This is known as filtration fraction. What is it known as? Filtration fraction. So filtration fraction is basically GFR upon RPF, that is renal plasma flow, that is equal to 120 upon 600, and since it is fraction, it is in percentage, so into 100 it comes down to 20%. So our normal filtration fraction is 20%. Okay, so this is about it. Now what is estimated GFR? Estimated GFR has a normal value, that is 90 ml per minute per body surface area, 1.73 meters square. So anything equal to this is a normal GFR, and anything less than this is going to be reduced GFR, right? Now let's talk about oncotic and hydrostatic pressure. Please understand, this is how it is, right? So this is your glomerulus, and this is the Bowman's capsule, and this is how it is going to come down, right? Always remember, in all systems, like if you'll understand about CLD, you'll read about liver, you'll read about ascites, you'll read about edema. In all those things also, this is going to make sense. All, the fluid or the blood has a tendency to stay in its place. This is a blood vessel, blood will stay in its place. It is not going outside anywhere else. Why? Because there are proteins in blood which keeps it inside. So whenever fluid is being prevented from going outside, that pressure will always be called as oncotic pressure. And whenever fluid is pulled outside, that pressure will be known as hydrostatic pressure. So now tell me, if I'm saying that filtration has increased, so which pressure has increased? The oncotic pressure or the hydrostatic pressure? The hydrostatic pressure has increased. Whenever there is hydrostatic pressure increase, the filtration will increase. Okay? And if I say no, it is not getting filtered as much, there is no filtration. So which kind of pressure has increased? Oncotic pressure has increased, and at this time there is less filtration. Did you understand this part? Come back to this now. And now you tell me, where is oncotic pressure more? In the afferent part or in the efferent part? In the afferent part, proteins are less, and proteins are responsible for oncotic pressure. So in the afferent arteriole, oncotic pressure is less. And in efferent arteriole, there is concentration of protein. So the oncotic pressure becomes more. Do you understand? Now if I ask, where is filtration more? At the level of afferent limb or at the efferent limb? Where is filtration going to be more? Since oncotic pressure is less, there is going to be more filtration from the afferent part of the arteriole, and as soon as the filtrate reaches towards the efferent part, there is more concentration of protein, and protein contributes in oncotic pressure. So oncotic pressure relatively increases. That is why there is reduced filtration when blood finally reaches towards the end of the glomerulus. Did you understand this part? So oncotic pressure is more towards the efferent. This is what I wanted to tell you. Now, net, we are talking about the glomerulus right now. Let's forget about all of it. Here, what is the actual net hydrostatic pressure? And what is the actual net oncotic pressure? And what is the actual net filtration pressure? These are the three things that we need to know. So the actual hydrostatic pressure is 35 mm of Hg. Net oncotic pressure is 25 mm of Hg. And the net filtration pressure is the difference of both, that is 10 mm of Hg. Now you tell me which is more, the hydrostatic pressure or the oncotic pressure? Obviously you can see that the hydrostatic pressure is more. Whenever the hydrostatic pressure is more, it means that filtration is going to occur or the filtration is going to be prevented. Filtration is prevented by oncotic pressure. So whenever there is hydrostatic pressure in excess, filtration will occur. Whenever there is oncotic pressure in excess, filtration will not occur. Okay. Net filtration pressure in normal kidneys is 10 mm of Hg. This is what we need to know. Now we'll be studying about filtration barrier. I think we'll do this in the next video. I have to actually leave. So filtration barrier we'll be completing in the next video. Okay. So that is all for today.